for coming today. We just wanted to let you know as well, we have a couple of options for different languages. If anyone would like to have the meeting completed in Spanish or Mandarin, please raise your hand or put a comment into the chat with the language of your preference. And we're going to repeat that in Spanish and Mandarin. Diana, would you mind repeating it in Spanish?
Sure. Buenas noches. Les queremos informar que para la reunión de esta noche tiene la opción de ver la presentación y compartir sus ideas con nosotros en español. Si está interesado en la opción en español, levante la mano haciendo clic en el botón que dice Participants en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. Luego haga clic en el botón que dice Raise Hand. También puede hacer clic en el botón que dice Chat en la parte de abajo de la pantalla y mándenos un mensaje que quiere participar en español. Vamos a esperar unos minutos y luego recibirá un mensaje en la pantalla invitándolos a un cuarto virtual en español.
Great, thank you, Diana. Wayne, would you mind repeating?
欢迎来到 Azusa 市的住房元素社区研讨会。我们今天的会议呢，会提供西班牙语和普通话的翻译。如果你需要普通话的翻译的话呢，请你在这个下面有一个表情的符号上面，你可以点一下，然后按这个用这个举手的方式来表示你需要翻译，或者你可以用这个对话框按一下底下的对话框，然后在这个对话框里面打字，表示你需要这个语言的翻译。谢谢。
Great, thank you, Wayne and Diana. And we're going to put that information in the chat as well. If anyone would like Spanish or Mandarin translation, we will have breakout rooms for those options available. And let's see, I think that's popping up in the chat in Spanish, and we'll pop it up in the chat with Mandarin as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get us underway. So again, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. We're glad to see you all here today to talk about housing in the city of Azusa. My name is Genevieve Shero. I'm with MIG, the consulting firm that's been hired to work with the city on the housing element update. Today, we also have representatives from the city, Matt Marquez, Manuel Munoz, and Dean Flores. And Manny's going to give a quick introduction and then turn it back to me. We have different MIG representatives for each of those different language rooms as well moving forward. Manny?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manny Munoz. I'm the planning manager here in the city of Azusa. The Azusa planning team is leading the housing element update. This is a very important document that is addressing the current housing crisis that we have here in the state of California. The city has also started a dynamic new campaign called Azusa Housing for All, in which we would address our housing needs for all of Azusans. Thank you for your participation in today's workshop.
Great. Thank you so much, Manny. So getting underway, I wanted to just start out with what we're looking to do today for the workshop goals. And this kind of aligns very well with what the city wants to do in general for the housing element. It's kind of framed into three main key goals. The first is to educate. So the Housing for All initiative and the Housing Element Update seeks to provide the community with an understanding of the housing element and provide information about housing issues in the community. We're also looking to engage with local community members about relevant issues and to gather all kinds of input. And then finally, to inform. The whole goal of this is really to inform the development of the city's housing policies moving forward. And we'll also provide some information on other ways you can participate moving forward in the process. So today we'd like to just go over a few how we're going to run the meeting protocols, give you an overview of what the housing element is and some of the process components associated with the project. And then we'd like to hear from you. We'd like to have a discussion. We have a digital whiteboard that we'd like to share your thoughts and ideas about housing issues and solutions in Azusa, and what are the ways that the city can best address local housing needs. But first, I'd like to share a video that the city has prepared for the Housing for All initiative that sets a good tone for our discussion today.
The city of Azusa is one of the best places in California to live, work, and play. And as the goes, it's time for us to have a conversation about housing. California law requires all cities and counties to have a plan for how they will meet the housing needs of everyone in the community, no matter their income level. That's why we've launched the Azusa Housing for All initiative, a clear plan and a dynamic framework for how we will meet our housing needs together as a community. When the state's 8-year population forecast gets revised, cities like Azusa need to update their housing plans to address these new projections. Now, some of you are probably thinking, what if we don't want to build more housing in Azusa? That's an understandable response. But before reacting, let's break it down, because there's actually a lot of reasons why it's important to meet our community's housing needs. Because of the high cost of housing, it can be challenging for cities in the San Gabriel Valley, like Azusa, to provide enough affordable housing for groups like seniors, families, and young professionals. Lack of affordable housing makes it more difficult for children that grow up in Azusa to stay in Azusa as adults. More importantly, lack of affordable housing can also lead to overcrowding, increased homelessness, impacts to healthcare, and increased costs to the community. Having housing options for all not only helps fulfill Azusa's housing plan, but ensures high quality of life for all our residents in the future. So, what happens if we don't get a new housing plan approved? Well, the city could be fined, lose state funding opportunities, lose the ability to issue permits, and in the end, not have a say in where new housing should go. So how many new homes are needed? Based on the state's forecast and the local housing formula, Azusa must plan to add 2,651 new housing units by October 2029. And of those 2,651 units, 1,128 need to be affordable to low and very low income households. The updated housing plan must show the exact location where future housing can be built and how many homes can be built at each location. But how do we decide where new housing should go? And what are considered good places for new homes? Here are a few appropriate locations where housing or density can be added to meet our community's needs. Vacant lots that have not been set aside for open space. Sites that are either underutilized or in need of rehabilitation. Locations where housing could become denser than it currently is. Areas near public transportation and essential services like healthcare, police, fire, and retail centers. And places where housing could be added to retail spaces or business parks, creating new live, work neighborhoods. Some cities, including Azusa, may also encourage homeowners to build mother-in-law quarters on their properties. These are called accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. But before we decide what goes where, we need your help. We want to know what's most important to you when thinking about where new housing should be located. This is an opportunity to move Azusa forward and work together to make sure the Housing for All initiative is a success. The decisions we make in the coming months will shape our community for years to come. So let's do the best thing for our city and make them together.
So that the video gives a bit of an overview. I'm going to dig in a little bit more to what the housing element is and some of the factors that we think about as we update the housing element. But that's a nice overview to get us started today. So just a little bit on the Zoom protocols and how we're going to participate today. We have kind of a summary of the different Zoom protocols here up on the screen. Please do mute yourself if you're not speaking with the unmute button. And start your video if you'd like. We'd love to connect with you in any way that we can these days. You can see the participants by clicking on the participant window. You can also raise your hand by right-clicking on the participants and looking at those. And you can use the chat feature to provide comments or questions that you might have as we go through the process. And then we'll have a discussion time at the end as well. Just a couple of meeting guidelines to keep us all on track. One person to speak at a time. Keep your comments brief, but we are a small group, so we're happy to hear from you, all of the ideas that you might have. Technology does happen. We sometimes have snafus, so please do be flexible and patient if anything comes up, but hopefully we'll be able to run quite smoothly. Please do respect one another's opinions. Mute yourself if you're not talking, and again, share your video if you'd like. We'd love to connect with you. And just a note as well, this is just one meeting, really the first meeting to kick off this process. So there's lots of other opportunities to engage moving forward as well. So in order to get some meaningful feedback from you, we want to give you a brief overview of the housing element, what it is, and why it is important. So the housing element itself is one of the chapters of the city's general plan. And the general plan is a long-range guiding document for the community that guides where new housing can be built, what different types of uses can go where transportation improvements should go, safety, noise, a variety of different components are included in the general plan. And the housing element is just one chapter of it. It is the only chapter that's required to be updated on a state legislated schedule, though. So it's required to be updated every 8 years, and we are on the cusp of that update deadline. So in addition to being the only element that's required to be updated on this legislated deadline schedule, it's also the only one that requires quite a thorough overview review from the state Housing and Community Development Department. So the state reviews every single jurisdiction's housing elements to make sure that it complies with state law and is meeting state housing initiative goals. So for this update, the deadline for adoption is October 2021. And if it's adopted on time and in compliance with all of those state laws, it's valid for 8 years. If it's not adopted on time, it becomes valid for only 4 years. Without a state reviewed certified element that complies with state laws, cities face potential and actually probable litigation. The city becomes ineligible for grants and funding. And also there are penalties in future housing element update cycles as well, where there might be additional RENA or additional units that need to be accommodated in future cycles. And the housing element's also unique because much of the housing element is driven by this statewide legislative intent to address the housing crisis. So the legislature has declared that the availability of housing is of vital statewide importance, and local and the state government has a responsibility to facilitate the improvement and development of housing to address the housing needs for all economic segments of the community. So what goes into the housing element? There's 5 main parts that are required to be in every housing element. The first is a needs assessment, where we look at local population characteristics, the housing needs of different types of special needs groups, and the local housing market to establish a baseline understanding for the document. The next section is the constraints section. And so this looks at all of the city's policies and procedures to identify any ways that the city is potentially constraining or impeding housing development. So this could be through zoning, through processes, or procedures. So we'll look at the city's processes and different zoning and rules to understand how housing may be constrained and how it could be better encouraged in the document. We also look at market constraints, some things that the city doesn't have control over, environmental constraints, and infrastructure constraints that could limit housing development. The housing element also looks at resources and a site's inventory. This looks at what's called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA, which we'll discuss in a few more slides. and available sites that might exist throughout town to accommodate new housing. It also identifies a variety of different resources, grants, administrative resources that can help support housing moving forward. The housing element also has to look back on previous progress, previous accomplishments during this previous 8-year period, and how well did the city accomplish the goals that it laid out 8 years ago. And all of this information goes together into a housing plan. That's really the heart of the document that identifies the city's housing goals, policies, and those implementation actions to move the housing vision forward. So just a point of comparison, in Azusa, there's a very close 50-50 split between renters and owners. So about half the population, 52% of the population, owns the home they live in, and 48% rent the home that they live in. So this is the type of data in that baseline needs assessment that goes into the housing element. And it's important because different population types, different groups have different housing needs. So this helps tell a story about what the housing needs are for Azusa. And this graph tells us that, it's important to address the issues of both renters and owners fairly equally in the community. One thing that comes up a lot in the housing element is the concept of affordable housing. So what is affordable housing? And the housing element's intended to encourage both market rate and affordable housing. But affordable housing itself occurs when someone's paying 30% or less of their income on housing costs. So once you start spending more than 30% of your household income on housing, it's defined as a housing cost burden. So this, in Azusa, 44% of all households experience a housing cost burden where they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs, including utilities. And then this is significantly aggravated for lower income families, where 68%, over 2/3 of lower income households in Azusa are considered to be cost burdened and spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So what type of households are considered lower income? So many times there's a misconception about affordable housing, that it's for folks who earn very, very little income. But in reality, there's a broad category, and you might be surprised at some of the income limits as well. The categories are actually based on a percentage of what's the average for the whole county. So for a family of 4 in Los Angeles County earning $90,000, that is considered low income. So this household should be spending about $2,200 a month to be able to not be cost burdened. So anything above that, if the family's earning $90,000 a month, they are considered cost burdened. So how does that compare to what folks make at different jobs? So this graph compares some average rents and mortgage costs in Azusa with what's affordable for a person making that income. So you can see, for example, a registered nurse, the median in rent and mortgage in Azusa is just barely affordable for a 2-bedroom apartment, or the mortgage of a median priced home nowadays. It's just barely affordable for a registered nurse, whereas the availability of housing that's affordable for a number of different types of jobs, firefighters, elementary school teachers, cooks, childcare workers, is significantly constrained. So you may have heard the word RHNA, or the acronym RHNA, recently. This is the acronym for the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So what is the RHNA? This is actually a number of housing units that the state agency that reviews all the housing elements, HCD, or the Housing and Community Development Department, they determine this on a regional basis for the entire state. They determine what is the housing need for the entire state over a period of time. So they identified for the entire Southern California region the need for the next 8 years. And they identified that it was 1.34 million new housing units that would need to be developed over the next 8 years to accommodate the existing need. Now, this addresses both the existing needs and some of the factors that are overcrowding people and causing other kind of impediments, but also any incoming housing need that will exist in the future. So the Southern California regional government then identifies a methodology to distribute these units to all of the jurisdictions throughout the Southern California region. So for Azusa, the identified need is for 2,651 new units. And this is broken up into different income categories. Very low and low to accommodate a bit over 1,100 about units to accommodate very low and low income units. Moderate income units, this is generally thought of as workforce housing. 382 new units, and then above moderate is market rate units, and another need for over 1,100 new units of that as well. So it's important to note, though, in the RHNA, it is not a construction obligation, so the city is not required to build the units. The role of the housing element is to show the land use and zoning policies and other policies that the city has put in place that will allow for this level of development to occur, but the city is not required to build these units. This table shows just some of the other RHNAs for surrounding jurisdictions as well. Generally pretty comparable to Azusa's RHNA allocation. The RHNA is linked largely to communities that have higher transportation and job centers, generally received additional housing units because those areas can support more housing due to the existing infrastructure that is in place. So moving forward, the housing element has to be drafted to show how Azusa will accommodate the new RHNA of 2651. So we'll do this by indicating to the state there are projects in the pipeline that can accommodate a portion of that RHNA. And the housing element will also look at potential sites that exist within the community. These can be vacant sites or sites that are considered underutilized because the use on that has either gone away or the property owner is considering changing uses and redeveloping their property. And the housing element will also look at the potential for additional accessory dwelling units within single-family neighborhoods. So the allowed density is important because it's linked to the analysis that shows how a jurisdiction is going to meet the lower income RHNA. So this is a little tricky, but the legislation assumes that there are economies of scale that are associated with higher densities. And so at higher densities, it's assumed that affordable housing is much more likely to get built. So in the housing element, we are able to identify those higher density sites as sites that can accommodate affordable housing. So just a little bit about what does density look like. So when we talk about density, we usually talk about it in terms of units per acre. So how many units can fit on 1 acre of land? And you can see here a few different examples of different types of development around California and what that looks like in Santa Barbara here at 30 units to the acre, up in the Bay Area at 45 units to the acre in pretty small units, and in Orange County at 55 units to the acre. So you can see a bit different scale associated with that, but there's also some nuances in that density based on unit size. There have also been new laws passed recently that affect what goes into the housing element. One new requirement is the city has to look at how the city can affirmatively further fair housing. So this means that the city must show actions to provide meaningful progress to overcome patterns of segregation, address disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity, promote fair housing choice, and to foster inclusive communities. So we'll be looking at ways that the city can better further fair housing and options for opportunity for folks throughout the community. So what's next? Just would like to give you a little timeline because we do have a pretty clear timeline set by the state for a housing element update. We are underway with workshops, this being the first workshop to kick off the process. We have a subcommittee that has been gathered of representatives from the community, which will meet tomorrow night and another public meeting. We also have another community workshop scheduled for the end of March, March 30th. And we also have a community survey that is live right now for folks to weigh in on. So once we've gathered all this input early on in the process, we will work with the city to develop housing policies and sites reflective of the community input that we've received and move forward with a draft housing element for the subcommittee and planning commission and city council to review in early summer of 2021 before the state reviews it over the summer, heading for adoption in October of 2021. And again, just a plug for the online survey. And Joey, I think, is going to also put a link in our chat as well, so you can copy it over and go ahead and take that survey if you haven't already. And if you if you have friends, family, or other groups that you can share it with, if you're representing an agency, please do share this link widely so that we can get input from the broadest cross-section of the community that we can. So now we'd like to somewhat turn it over to you and hear from you about what are the major housing issues and challenges that you see facing Azusa, and what are some of those solutions? What can be done about it? What are the types of housing that are particularly needed in the community? And then thinking a little bit about housing locations too. With Arena of 2651, where are some locations in the community that new housing can be accommodated? And what are some of those creative solutions that we can start to talk about to address some of those housing issues? So we have a digital whiteboard that we would like to share and start to have a discussion about some of the thoughts that you might have. And let's start first with what are some of the major housing issues and challenges that you see in Azusa today? And so please do, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, put your comments in the chat, anything you'd like, but we would like you to unmute yourself and join in the conversation. So do we have anyone who would like to start our conversation off today?
I'd like to say something. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Please proceed.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Peña, and I actually live in the unincorporated area, but there's, I'm very involved in the city of Azusa. But I think the challenges that we have here in Azusa is overcrowding in houses. But I also feel that that has a lot to do with high rents. The rents are very high. And where I live, there's several big apartment complexes, and they're very overcrowded.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Vivian Moss, and I work with the low-income housing for rehab. And I see one of the problems that we're having is that there are people, many people have lost their jobs and stuff. We need more low-income housing. I get so many calls on that there's no places to rent, no places to buy for low-income families.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Steve Castro, Azusa Chamber of Commerce. Hi to everybody. Manny, has the city identified currently any land projected for any kind of housing at all?
This is part of the process that we're doing now, part of the housing element. And once this document is adopted, we will have specific areas in which we will be targeting for future housing. But as of yet, no.
Thank you.
Mercedes, please.
Manny, can you tell me the status of the property that's referred to as Atlantis Gardens? Is that property going to be able to be rehabbed?
Yeah, so that whole parcel actually owned by the LA County Community Development Commission and so forth. So the city has been engaging with them to do some type of project there. It is on the county supervisor's radar. And we're hoping that through this process, it kind of highlights it a little further to make sure that we have a solid and comprehensive project on site.
Good. And then also the housing that's going to be part of the Orchard, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the new complex, the A2 property. Will that be included in the 2651 that we need?
Genevieve, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's once it's complete, correct, and finalized?
So the date, anything that has a certificate of occupancy after June 30th, 2021 can count towards this 2651.
Oh, really? I thought we just had to plan for the 2651. We didn't have to have them built yet.
Correct, correct. We just have to plan for it, but as part of the housing element, we can kind of cut down that 2651 with those that are already being built and in the pipeline.
That's a big number for Azusa, I think, in my opinion, but.
Thank you.
I have a question. What role does APU's a population play in our city population, and what role does their housing play in availability of housing?
That's a great question. So with regard to the types of housing that HCD counts towards what the housing need is, any dorms are not included in that housing need, but any regular apartments are. So anyone who's, which is the most of the APU, I think, housing. So those would be included. Any group quarters are excluded. So it's a little bit nuanced because it's kind of how that housing is structured. Any new housing that goes to support new student housing that is in the form of an apartment building, that will count towards the RHNA.
And does school attendance count towards city population or not?
You know, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the census actually has included as far as resident population for students living on campus. And I think it's based on how each student fills out the census and where their permanent residence is.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Joyce. May I speak?
Yes, please.
So I work with Sandra Serna in Neighborhood Connections. It's our program here that offers social services. And one thing that I find that as an issue is the constant changing of eviction moratoriums during this COVID-19 crisis. And in general, a lot of people don't know, how to go about when they receive a letter in terms of understanding the process of evictions. So I think educating would be a solution, but I wanted to include that here as an issue and a challenge.
Great, thank you. Are there other tenant education needs beyond the kind of immediate COVID-19 eviction letters that folks are receiving?
Manny, a question for you. Where does the city, where are we allowed to give advice in regard specifically to what someone would be allowed to do and not allowed to do, specifically regarding the eviction moratorium? Are we taking chances on that, or we defer them to someone else?
Yeah, we would defer them to what the county, or if not, what the state has, because we didn't enact anything locally at the city level. So we do have housing advocates, and we do have housing rights centers that they can kind of mitigate through that, but we will send them to the county portal for the eviction, whatever current is.
Thank you.
And I believe you have your hand raised if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, my name is Ann Graff. I'm the Director of Information Technology and Library Services, and I have a couple of comments. One is to segue off of what Joyce had said. In addition to tenant education about evictions, I think that landlord education about the types of housing that they can provide as part of various programs that the county is putting out there to house low income and potential diversion for homelessness. There's a lot of, I think that's important. And then secondly, in addition to the eviction education, so a lot of times people come to the library to talk to our Neighborhood Connections staff, and they can assist either directing them to the correct persons or answering their questions or working with Union Station Homeless Services if they are experiencing issues related to homelessness.
Great, thank you. Are there other particular thoughts that folks would like to share that are kind of key critical housing issues that you would like to see addressed in the housing element? We heard about overcrowding, the need for more affordable housing, education for tenants and landlords. Are there other thoughts of key needs that need to be addressed in Azusa? Mercedes, please go ahead.
I think education about the ADUs would be helpful because, you know, people are barely starting to talk about it. And we do have some property in Azusa where they could easily build, you know, a mother-in-law unit or something on their property, and that would help us achieve that number.
Great, thanks. We will also add that in. Maureen, you also have your hand raised. Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I was just looking at the issues and challenges that popped up. And so, you know, my attention is student related. So I saw the item on your first column, third one down, about students living on campus. There is census data that's provided from APU. They do that based on there's a whole group that deals directly with our Res Life staff. So I wanted to answer that question for you and say, yes, that is part of the census piece. And we also did education related to census counting for any of our folks that were living not only on campus or in university housing that is off campus, but also within the city confines, so that they would recognize they need to be counted as Azusa residents by virtue of the fact of being residents for 10 months of the year. So just wanted to bring that up.
Great, thank you so much for clarifying it. And since you brought it up, do you have, would you like to shed a little light too on some of the APU student housing needs that you see most pressing?
Well, we are, you know I should learn how to turn off. Let me turn off my hand. There we go. I think right now we're in a bit of just transition, recognizing that our undergraduate population is going to continue to shrink as we're looking at the 2025 data related to college-bound students and how many of those are. So it means that we will likely be able to move. We won't be doubled and tripled up in dorms anymore. So we may have enough of housing within our own campus, which we require our students that are freshmen to live on campus. Beyond that, the closer that we can keep students to APU proper, we want to keep them in the local area. We prefer them to be in Azusa, Glendora, this general area, so they can experience the best of the communities that they would then be choosing to live in, as well as the continued opportunities for engagement locally. I think the ability to get between housing units if they choose outside of the institution to our campus, and how that feels safe is critical. So the other work being done in the pedestrian group that I'm also a part of, I think that will, I mean, they dovetail together. We actually have students that don't choose to live on campus, may often go into rental situations within Azusa or into Glendora because they just find it more cost effective for them. So that continued ability to, we'd rather keep them in our local vicinity than have them move further and further away from the institution. One, because we can hold them accountable better, but two, then they're contributing hopefully as productive citizens to our local community, but they're doing all the rest of it, which is, you know, purchasing locally and all of that. So we continue to hear that piece about the residential element. And then we'll be looking over the next years of just, you know, APU has these properties that we already are part of university housing. How will we look at those moving forward? So it's just that continued access and utilizing our own campus resource as well.
Great. And just kind of anecdotally, do you have a sense of the types of housing that students are most interested in? Like the size? Are they studios? Are they, you know, looking to share with
it tends
larger
to be
units?
shared situations that you end up having students, and I should say shared when it comes to your traditional undergrad domestic student who ends up after year one forming great relationships with others, and they want to move into a communal environment. They may or may not be able to do that in our own apartment style housing. They tend to want to go apartment style, sophomore, junior, especially junior, seniors. So that tends to translate either into our own apartments, or if they opt out of that, apartment style living tends to mean condos locally. So that can challenge when it comes to parking, but it has ended up condos and with at least doubled up in rooms. That tends to be the pattern that I've noted from what I've heard from some of our Res Life staff talking about where our students are going when they don't stay on our own campus. That tends to be, there hasn't been as much of a desire necessarily for studio environments. Where they're by themselves, they're looking for that community. And it often ends up like majors end up together because like the nurses understand that program and how demanding it is. And so there's a lot of that shakes out. Internationally, that can be where they might start off as in an individual studio-like environment and then end up coming together around shared cultural experience or integration, etc.
Sure, great. Thank you for the insight.
Thank you.
Other thoughts and ideas that folks might have? Mercedes, please.
I just thought of something. We have some schools in the Azusa Unified that we were forced to close. Is there any possibility that we could buy those properties to add housing there? Probably single family homes.
Sure. So those are not owned by the city, so those are owned by the school district, but they're kind of by the state legislatures kind of elevated those as kind of ideal sites that the city looks at moving forward. Any publicly owned lands are kind of at the top of the list to start those discussions about.
It seems like it would be helpful to both the school district giving them much needed funds and the city to get the property that we need to build these 2651 dwelling units.
Yes, thank you. And Joey's recording those comments on our digital whiteboard. Any other thoughts, folks we haven't heard from yet? Anyone want to weigh in with particular housing issues, or we've kind of moved into solutions here, ideas for change too. We heard about education and some particular housing sites with closed elementary schools. Any other ideas that we'd like to discuss about housing issues and challenges, or some more opportunities? Ryan, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Ryan Serrano, Field Deputy for the Office of Supervisor Hilda Solis. I just wanted to say this is an amazing event. I'm glad to be a part of it. And I wanted to know about perhaps solutions around interim housing and rapid relief sheltering. Is that a part of this housing plan or housing element?
Absolutely. We're looking to receive input from community members and everyone with, a stake in the community about what are the housing issues that are most pressing that should be addressed in the housing element. If you'd like to expand a little bit too on what you and Supervisor Solis are doing with regard to interim housing and what you're kind of looking for as well.
Sure, yeah. So Supervisor Solis is committed to making sure that we offer housing to everyone in the community. That includes those in the community that may not be able to provide for themselves at the current moment because of X, Y, and Z. And so we want to be able to provide opportunities for the community to reach out and help those members of our community that maybe don't have the necessary tools, and get them connected to those that do have the tools so that they can once again be productive members of society.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts from the group before we add a couple of more prompting questions? It looks like we're getting some comments into the chat as well, Joey. We have a comment that restrictive parking requirements are a challenge to new housing development. So the city's existing parking rules requiring a certain amount of parking per unit can be considered a constraint to housing development. That is one of the key things that leads to how a building is constructed, and one of those key factors that all developers are looking at. So thank you. We've added that to our digital whiteboard as well. And Anne, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was thinking that the landlord education could be on both sides, because it's really an opportunity for landlords to tap into funding that is being provided by the county or the state that would allow them to have have a lower income kind of a situation, but with funding that's partly subsidized.
Great, thank you. So including more landlord education about Section 8, some of the programs that the county has in place to help support formerly homeless folks moving into housing. There are grants available for landlords and protection to rent as well to help facilitate that for folks. So
Yes.
Getting that information out more widely to landlords, as well as those informational items about what they have to do as well, what they can do to support our community. Great, thank you. Other thoughts before we move on a little bit, and we're going to come back, but a few thoughts about the particular types of housing that you see as needing to be accommodating. We mentioned overcrowding as a concern. Do you see a need for larger family housing? Do we see a need for housing for particular types of folks? We talked about some interim housing options. What do you see as kind of key priorities for types of housing in Azusa? Go ahead.
I don't see a need for any large housing. I think that the housing trends are moving more towards, near the metro, like what we're doing with the Orchard and what we're doing with A2. I think that's what will help us solve some of our housing problems. People aren't looking for big homes anymore like they did in the past. The older generation doesn't want to have to maintain them, and the younger kids aren't, they're not really interested in a lot of yard work and housework, in my opinion.
Great. So looking for more kind of smaller affordable housing by transit as a trend.
Right.
I'd like to add on to that. This is Yolanda. Regarding, I don't think we're in need of any large apartment complex. There are quite a few of those in our community, but that's where the overcrowding comes in.
So looking at kind of smaller lots, smaller apartment complexes and other types of models.
Yes.
So large buildings kind of. Joey, I don't know that it's luxury units. I think that this is about just like the scale of the whole apartment building. So a building that has like 200 units or something. Not looking to see more of those, but looking to see more smaller scale apartment buildings.
I mean, what happens is when you have the large apartment complex, I feel that you begin to get slumlords, and you begin to get landlords that don't live here, but just have people living there, and they don't check on their properties. And I just think that it just gets out of control.
I think it's important in Azusa, a sense of community. We're really a tight-knit community, and I think that's what we need with the smaller apartments. When you get the big apartment complexes, it just brings trouble.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Joey, we also have a comment in the chat as well that we need more housing that meets ADA requirements. So folks in wheelchairs and other abilities can access the housing. Other thoughts, please do feel free to drop them in the chat if you're more comfortable with that, or raise your hand or just shout it out. And I'm letting a few people in that are new to the meeting. If you're new to the meeting, we are discussing housing issues in Azusa for the housing element update. So please do feel free to weigh in with your ideas. So specifically talking about where can new housing be accommodated and what types of housing do you see as priorities moving forward? We talked about housing. I'll pull up the map here. We talked about housing close to the transit center, to the metro down in downtown Azusa. Are there other locations that you see as appropriate locations for new housing in the community? Does it make sense on particular corridors? Are there particular corridors that you would like to see it less? Are there any other thoughts about that? And these letters all correlate. There's the survey that is live now. These letters correlate to the responses in the survey, looking for input from community members about where in Azusa they would like to see new housing options. I think we might have a consensus that near the metro is where it's at. There we go. So just thinking a little bit too about what you would like to see the city consider as far as new housing policies to address local needs. I think we talked about this under solutions. We have some ideas. Are there other things that you would like the city to consider for policies to move forward a housing for all in Azusa? Other things that you would like to see integrated into the housing element? Key issues that need to be addressed or solutions and ideas that you have?
I want to say that when they're going to be making these complexes, if they do hold the landlords accountable for their properties to keep them up.
So a long-term maintenance plan for new housing, especially rental housing, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Other thoughts? I'll let you keep thinking, and I'm going to start to summarize some of the key themes. We have some comments in the chat, Joey. Another key policy that should be considered are design standards that strengthen and support community character. So we'll go ahead and add that to our city policies that can best address local housing needs. And please feel free to drop other ideas about that in here. I'd like to kind of summarize with what I've heard kind of elevate as the key considerations that you would like to see integrated into the housing element moving forward. I heard the need for more affordable housing as a key consideration. We have a comment in the chat, more Section 8 housing for lower income families as a key city policy to move forward. I heard education as a key consideration as well for both tenants and landlords. I also heard education about housing, so education about ADUs and new housing types. We heard a target housing, new housing by transit. And by the metro. I heard the need for a long-term maintenance plan for rental apartment buildings. And addressing constraints for parking. Addressing development constraints like parking. I think we heard design standards that strengthen and support community character, so good design matters. Other things that we talked about that I'm missing in kind of our key themes that folks would like to see addressed in the housing element. Joey, is there anything else from that you wrote down that I'm forgetting?
I'm not seeing anything. I think, did you capture just the need for smaller units that fit within the character, less sort of luxury, or not luxury, excuse me, but larger units? You know, the smaller scale apartment buildings, and also, you know, just the smaller, more affordable units themselves.
Smaller scale apartment buildings, and we got more affordable housing. Yes. Thank you for capturing that one. Other thoughts on the key themes that we would like to see addressed? Design, long-term maintenance plan, holding landlords accountable too. I think that's kind of included in our, maybe we have an update to the landlord one. So if we have educating landlords, educating tenants, and then educating landlords as well on a variety of topics. So holding them account. So this one's kind of a three-prong, holding them accountable, what they have to do as well as what they can do. We have another comment in the chat, Joey, to encourage more mixed use, smaller, medium along already commercial corridors. So also creating a more equitable housing focus by helping activate these depressed areas of the city outside of transit corridors. So thinking about an additional location for more mixed use in the community as far as what types of housing and where can housing be accommodated. So we can put that in our purple comments as well about the need for more mixed use along commercial corridors. So I can add that up. New housing by transit and commercial corridors. Are there other thoughts that folks have that you'd like to have us record in this digital whiteboard? So this input is really valuable for us as we consider the housing element update. The key considerations of what are those issues, what are the solutions that should be considered by the community. So we do really appreciate your input. Manny, were you going to say something?
Yes, so just touching on affordable housing, I know that was kind of a theme in the beginning of the conversation. Just making sure that everyone knows that, you know, we should be working towards having a policy on, you know, through code amendments and stuff like that, where it's a little more ingrained in the community. Because currently under our current housing element cycle, we only added 6 affordable housing units. And the existing affordable housing units that we do have in the city are, you know, little by little are going to be going away, because, you know, each of them have a certain timeline that they're put a covenant on the property. So we definitely need to be thinking forward and creating more affordable housing units, so we have that proper balance in the community. So looking at it from a policy perspective, we're just throwing it out there to the group.
Anne, go ahead. Do you have your hand raised?
Yeah, so just to segue off of what Manny said, I would like to ask or mention how other types of housing would fit into this, not just the affordable housing, but possibly housing with wraparound services. So that would be like not a shelter, but like a transitional housing with wraparound services to basically assist those who are unhoused and transitioning to a permanent solution. And where that fits in terms of affordable housing, because that would be the next step for those, that group of individuals.
Great, and I think thank you for commenting on that, because I think we did miss the homeless and supportive housing in our kind of key summary here. So the housing element does address supportive housing, where what the city is required to do by state law as far as allowing supportive housing, encouraging supportive housing. So we will be looking at what is the existing homeless population in the community based on the latest point in time count, what the city can do to encourage more supportive housing in the community, and to allow it as is required by state law. So that will also be included in the housing element.
I've got a question. This is for either Manny or maybe Nico. Do we know where we fall in line in regards to our neighboring cities, or maybe throughout the entire San Gabriel Valley, as to what our affordable housing is compared to the rest of the valley?
Genevieve, do we have that? I think, was it one of the slides? Or?
So Andrew, is your question pertaining to how much existing affordable housing exists in each community, or how much is SCAG and the state telling us we need to increase?
What the actual is right now?
So I don't have those actual numbers. I do know that Azusa has historically provided a lot of the affordable housing for the San Gabriel Valley, you know, over the past 30 years. But much of that was not done through necessarily deed restricted units. So when we're talking through the deed restricted units, I don't know that there's a really good source that actually quantifies it for each individual jurisdiction. We will be looking at those units that are at risk of converting to market rate in the housing element. So those are a key consideration as those go away. But I don't know of a good source that consolidates all that data for us.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other final thoughts that that you'd like to leave us with as far as key themes that you would like to see addressed in the housing element update? If not, oh, sorry, Maureen, please do go ahead.
Just one other thought, and I want to be careful how I say this as I'm jotting through. recognizing that the city absolutely needs to be present and helpful related to the supportive housing piece, the affordable housing piece. So please know, I'm thinking through the lens of a parent that might be sending their student into the city, having that balance too of what is deemed to be safe as far as safe housing. And that may be accomplished through the design piece that was mentioned, through the pedestrian piece that's also at work. So just how those, I see so much intersection between this conversation and the other conversation, but I think that that's something that it's just present on every college campus. My colleagues at USC and UCLA, everyone talks about this, but as we position what you're trying to do with housing, I just wouldn't want to lose that element of the safety factor. And that it's also, I think so much effort has been placed by the city of Azusa to be positioned as a contemporary city that's on the move by the mixed use, by the access to transportation, et cetera. And so those two components of that contemporary and safety, while being available and accessible to so many more people. I don't know how to say that, but that's what was kind of swirling around in my mind and thinking about how do you attend to all those different constituents, not wanting to excise any people group from having access to all that Azusa has to offer. And also, like, I want the kids that go to school at APU and graduate from APU to consider Azusa a place that they now want to live permanently, and not just have this be a portal, if they're not local, a portal to go back to wherever they were. And that's so often happens. You know, we transport people out. I would like to keep them in the San Gabriel Valley and keep them in Azusa. So that other piece, I think, could be a critical way that we accomplish that other end.
Great, thank you. We'll add that to the key themes as well that we've discussed. We have a couple new attendees here, so please do feel free to drop comments in the chat. I don't want to keep everyone, but I'm happy to stay on with folks who have just joined to provide a little bit more feedback about the housing element to you if you would like, and to listen to your comments and feedback. I do want to put one more plug for our housing element survey that is currently available right now. Joey, if you wouldn't mind dropping that back into the chat again, please do share this widely with your groups, from, students to, if, any parish, any neighborhood group, any group that you know of that you could share this survey link with. We are looking to our community partners to help spread the word about this as widely and broadly as we possibly can. So we do appreciate your help with that as well. So thank you so much. We've got that link in English, Spanish, and Mandarin available for folks to take those surveys, and are looking forward to the feedback. That survey will be open through the end of the month, and there will be drawings for participation. So if you'd like a great swag bag from the city of Azusa with the Housing for All swag, we are very excited for your participation in that as well. So we very much appreciate your time today. And if anyone has any closing thoughts, please do feel free to share. Rick, would you like to share any thoughts? You're good? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for attending. We have a couple of new attendees that I'm going to leave the line open for you, and we can chat individually if you'd like. Thank you all so much for your insights today, and very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the line new still that would like to share anything? Oh, I think our new folks left. All right. So I think that's it then for us today. Thank you all so much for attending, and we really appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Genevieve.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you, Genevieve. Thanks, team.
Thanks. Bye-bye.